Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, to a great spring day here in Washington, D.C. We got the blossoms are peak. I think they're going to be blowing off in a few days, but it's gorgeous here. I'm Riki Ellison. I'm the founder and chairman of the Missile Defense Advocacy Alliance. We've been involved with missile defense for 40 years, and MDAA has been around for over 20 years. We have the same mission, core mission, that we believe, no doubt, 100%, that missile defense makes our nation safer and the world safer. And we advocate for the deployment of it, the evolution of it, and the development of missile defenses, all systems to make our country safe. This is our 72nd Congressional Roundtable. It's a discussion on missile defense with Tim McRae from the Missile Defense Agency. The last time I saw Tim was this past September 24, at the end of September, right. And I was in a silo with you on Missile Field 4 at Fort Greely at the bottom of the new NGI silos that you're doing. So it's great to see you again, and I we back then we talked about going big, thinking big, going fast on this, and just a historic memory of the 20th anniversary of putting, with a presidential directive, not executive order,
right. A little bit different.
In under 2 years. Under 2 years, you were able to put in GBIs, the Missile Field 1. You had an architecture with SBX, I think, was out there, part of it, and you had a command and control system over the top of it. It's just a remarkable achievement 20 years ago. So we're honored to have you here, Tim. I'm gonna read your bio because it's an important one for everybody to understand who you are and what you represent. So Tim is the director for strategy, plans, and resources for the Missile Defense Agency. He is responsible for overseeing all Missile Defense Agency strategic planning and resource management matters, encompassing financial management, cost estimating, human resources, congressional liaison, public affairs, and strategic communications. He provides leadership, vision, oversight, and strategic advice for all agency resources matters relating to the agency's 10+ billion annual fiscal resources to develop, test, and sustain a layered missile defense system to protect the United States, its deployed forces, allies, and friends from missile attacks. It's impressive. Prior to that, he was the program manager for the marquee program of the Missile Defense Agency, the ground-based course system. He's also had experience with Israel Cooperative. You've also had experience with THAAD on the program. So he's quite qualified on everything. So I do want to start off with a win, Tim. Let's start off with a win. Okay. Last week, your Navy Aegis on their Flight Test 40 and U.S. Pictionary did an amazing thing with your development, and you're the only one in the country doing this for defensive hypersonic glide strike missiles. Can you just give us a little rundown on what happened last week?
Absolutely, Ricky. So, last week's test was exceptional. Another good, solid demonstration of integrated missile defense. So missile defense, we about 4 years ago set apart to come up with a sensing capability for hypersonic missiles. And so we developed it and got it onto orbit in less than 37 months, which is truly impressive to go from concept to on orbit.
That's HBTSS?
That is the Hypersonic Ballistic Tracking Space Sensor.
Okay.
And so it was part of this architecture for this test. And so what we were able to demonstrate is a launch of a hypersonic threat vehicle built by the Missile Defense Agency coming in the vicinity of an Aegis cruiser. The Hypersonic Ballistic Tracking Space Sensor picked it up, tracked it, provided that information through our command and control battle management system, C2BMC, who then moved that data to the Aegis weapon system to conduct that simulated engagement of a sea-based terminal capability. So from space to space comms to C2BMC to a fire control on a ship to a weapon system full end-to-end demonstration of that integrated missile defense architecture, which has become foundational to the operations and regional systems.
And this is a mission that everybody in the world, right? It's an impossible mission, they say, to be able to defend against a hypersonic glide missile, and you've proven it with the terminal defense capability, correct? And this is moving that along, that we have capabilities doing it.
Absolutely, it's taking things that have already been developed, stitching them together in an integrated fashion that gives capabilities that the systems were never necessarily intended to perform. And it's a foundational element to when we bring on our glide phase interceptor. Then we'll be able to attack that hypersonic threat in its glide phase and in its terminal phase with multiple weapon systems, both kinetic and non-kinetic.
And part of your, just talk about the investment that MDA, what a allotment of funding is for that mission. I don't think it's very much right now.
It's not
compared to a GMD system, or why are we not at a much higher level?
I think the department is getting there. When the hypersonic threat came about, we were also focused on hypersonic offensive, and I think he had Dr. Mike Griffin on, and they were talking about 78-80% of the department's resources going into the offensive side, 20% coming to the defensive side. That is going to grow. Glide phase interceptor certainly will be a major investment for the department to get after that mid-course, that glide phase aspect of that threat. Now that the hypersonic tracking space sensor has demonstrated its success, its algorithms are solid. Now that transitions to the Space Force, and they will proliferate that. And so as we're demonstrating these incremental capabilities, the deployment of it is where the resources will really start to come into the department and ensure that we have a constellation of HBTSS satellites, and we have glide phase interceptors and the sea-based terminal interceptors. Those investments just build on something that we're already doing.
Is anybody else doing this inside our Pentagon, inside our services? Or are you the only one doing this?
MDA is the only one that's tying together from an integrated fashion, from space sensing to command and control to fire control to weapons engagement. MDA is the only one doing it, and we've been doing it for several years now.
And when do you think it's possible to get a capable, deployable, operational hypersonic glide defense system in the way we're going, or potentially if we had resources adequately enough and authorities adequately enough to get you that? What's that estimate?
So the current program is really not set up for success. It's been stretched out, delivering an initial capability in 2034, 2035. Wow. So a decade from now. That's not necessarily what the technology mandates. Technology is near ready now. There's a couple scientific things we got to close on, but they're not undoable. But it's a resourcing challenge, and so resourcing has stretched it out for 10 years. If that program were resourced in a more appropriate manner to get after the threat now that's already on us, 2028, 2029, maybe 2030 are all doable. As not only just a glide phase interceptor, but an ability to demonstrate end to end of that capability.
And this was kind of done without a new policy, right? You were policy restricted on hypersonic glide. There's different policies from where that is, whether it's the U.S. NORTHCOM versus U.S. INDOPACOM and other ones. And now it seems it's pretty clear that the president wants a hypersonic glide defense. I mean, I think that's very clear coming forward.
I agree. I think policy has certainly shifted to address the peer and near peer threats versus being constrained by policy to a limited rogue nation. But policy is one piece that has to change, and it has. The resourcing also has to change. Over the past 2 decades, after that great event in September of 2004, that limited defensive capability, the agency's budget controls have been flat. And so we were about 10 billion in 2004. We're about 10 billion in 2026. But a lot of things have changed. So inflation changed. That's about a difference of a buying power about $3.2 billion. As we have deployed more ships, more THAAD batteries, that comes with an O&S tail. And so now our ability to do research and development is starting to diminish because we're doing more O&S.
We're not going to ask, or the president or Congress is not going to ask you to do this inside that budget with NGI with that. You're going to have additional funding for this. There's no way you can do this. If you're going to do the time frame you said you were going to do it for 2030, 2028, what's the, so you're going to have more funding, correct? On this thing, and how much, I don't know if we can get into that, but just,
I mean,
that's a
resourcing is going to have to be, the resourcing strategy has to change to get after these threats for the homeland that the executive order calls for is going to require additional resources across all organizations. So not just MDA, Space Force is going to require it, the Army is going to require it, Navy and then the Air Force, they're all going to require additional resources to get after these threats, to develop those capabilities. MDA is going to need the resources to be increased so that we can integrate all those things. MDA doesn't need to build everything. MDA is extremely well postured with technical folks to integrate complex systems. That's what we've been doing for the past 2.5 decades. And I think that's really we're the center of the excellence for the department on that national level integration of space and terrestrial weapon systems.
So just one more question on hypersonic. So you've got a pretty good capability with the terminal capability with the SM-6 most likely. Where's the wide area? That's the big challenge, I would assume. If you do the tracking, you can see it from space and you get fire control data. How do you do the wide area? What's that interceptor? Is it terrestrial based? Is it space based? Or that seems a very typical problem.
Yeah. So space-based interceptor is absolutely called out for us as a department to get after. It's a challenge. You've had Dr. Griffin on here. You've had General Gutlein on here. I think General Gutlein said it's a wicked hard technical challenge. But the nation's ready for it.
You're the best wicked hard problem solvers, right?
We're problem solvers. So that's one aspect of this hypersonic threat is when it's in its boosting phase. But after it tips over, it's almost impossible to get that with a space-based interceptor because it's lower in the atmosphere. And so it's in the endo-atmosphere. So that requires a unique set of effectors. And so the department needs to get after it with non-kinetic effectors. Can you do it with electronic attack? Can you do it with other disrupting technologies? Then you need the hard kill effectors, like the glide phase interceptor. Getting after in that mid-course glide phase of that threat is critical to keeping that away from its objectives. What is it trying to hit? Whether that's an aircraft carrier or whether that's a city or a port. And so it doesn't necessarily need to be ground-based. It needs to be ground or sea-based. It needs to be a weapon system that is agile enough. If we need that system to protect San Francisco, then we can put that thing on the ground in San Francisco and it can have an effective capability for the defense of that population center or on a ship.
Would you say that that's a different weapon system than terminal? And would that be available by the end of 2030, or does that need much more research and development?
No, the glide phase interceptor, if resourced, the technology will be ready. The challenges can be overcome, and we can deploy that capability in the late 2020s, probably 2029 or 30. And that's a great program because that's a demonstration of that cooperative development with Japan. And so that missile is not just U.S. Japan's in the development cycle with us, and together we're committed to delivering that capability earlier.
That's great. On top of that, let's because I think you're underestimated, or you're not thought as well as you are. What do you have, like 550 engineers? How many engineers does MDA have? or even maybe that's less in doing missile defense? Just give us the whole total, because I think there's other organizations out there that are trying to do this, and they're not even in close in comparison to what your size is or amount of people you put on. So go ahead and give us a little.
MDA is a kind of a unique organization. So we're a multi-service organization. And so we have our MDA core civilians and contractors. We have civilians and contractors from the Navy working in our Aegis program office. We have partnerships with the Army is embedded within our THAAD program office. And so it's not just a singular type organization. Our labor categories across civilians, contractors, the laboratories, the universities, we bring the best to bear on whatever the technical problem is. Our manpower is probably somewhere right around 10,000 across all those labor categories. And out of that, about 70% is technical. And so when we get into a technical problem, a wicked hard physics problem, like General Goodline said, we've got access to an existing workforce and access to the best and brightest across the FFRDCs and UARCs and industry, both traditional and non-traditional, to focus in on that problem, gang tackle it, and get it into the system in a way that it works. And then when we do that, we tackle that problem, but we do it as part of an integrated fashion. So when we build that effector like a glide phase interceptor to overcome those challenges of a hypersonic threat, we're also putting that system capability into the weapon system. We're putting that requirement into the sensing capability, and we're bridging it together through command and control.
It's a system of systems.
A total systems of systems.
So let's just be clear on this. Does Army P&O Space, SMDC, have that many? Does SDA have that many? Does DIAMDO? Does R&E?
Yeah,
Who's even close to you in terms of that? That
Yep.
Let's be clear.
Yeah.
I just don't think there's anybody that's even
I agree.
1/10 of it.
I agree, Riki. I think Space Force is a larger organization. Air Force is, Army is no doubt, but an organization that's focused on this singular problem set of integrated missile defense for regional and homeland, no one is organized or equipped like MDA is. We've got the talent in the workforce, we have the tools, we have the M&S structure, and it's building on a foundation that already exists today. So this executive order is exceptional. It's going to put a defense in place for our nation that we've needed, and we've got the right folks to do that. And I agree. I don't think anybody else has that level of capability to go right now inside the department, in a service, or inside the Pentagon. I don't think so.
Let's talk about your culture. I just want to have a because you're not just MDA. I know you were formed in 2002. That's when MDA, we were formed at the same time you were. You go all the way back, and I think the SDIO and the Strategic Defense Initiative, and then you go to BIMDO, and then you go to Ballistic Missile Defense Organization, and then because that depth of knowledge that goes all the way back to Clementine and the original tests of the IRIS program is all yours. And also, the first things we did with President Reagan was a memorandum of understanding with Japan, Israel, and UK. And we weren't allowed to do ground-based interceptors. We weren't even allowed to do space-based interceptors. Right. Everybody thought was out there. That was just a research program. SDI was just a research program. But the real stuff happened with terminal defense and stuff that you were able to within the policy and the treaties to be able to do. So just give us the depth of MDA's roots all the way back to 1983 with Abramson leading this organization.
Right. So the need for missile defense has been there since 1945. And so we're about 80 years in the making. But we're really focused with the Strategic Defense Initiative Organization. Really looked at, we need to have a space-based interceptor. We need to have space and terrestrial sensing. We need to have ground effectors like a ground-based interceptor, and we need to tie it together. And so,
what's the difference between the executive order? 40 years later,
it reads a whole lot like the initial phase one
all
architecture.
The way back. But that was research. Now we're saying that we can
deploy it. Yeah, the technologies weren't there at that time to really bring it into reality. But a lot of engineering and studying of the problem started occurring. And that's been occurring now for 40 years. And so that depth of knowledge, that understanding of the environments, what does it take to have propulsion systems, seekers, communications, every aspect of what it's going to take end to end to kill those threats has been going on. But that initial SDIO really focused on, I'll say big strategic threats.
Yeah.
Then came along the Ballistic Missile Defense Organization. That was
downsized, right? I think we had two presidents to go forward.
Yep.
That went on it. One president said, no, we're not going to spend money on it.
That's right.
And then
kind of an ebb and flow.
Right. And then he got caught with the 1998 Missile Defense Act, which he said, deploy this as soon as technologically feasible. And that was because of North Korea flew over that.
Right. That was when we made the transition to the missile defense. agency.
Well, go from SDIO to
Yeah, so,
Ballistic Missile Defense Organization.
okay. So SDIO, MDA was a direct report to the Secretary of Defense. And so that had access to the decision maker. And so when you think about the ability to go fast, that was really
All the way.
that was all the way.
But you
from
weren't.
the
You were just
director
doing
to
tests, right? You weren't doing
development and development and tests.
and
No
you had
deployment.
authorities to do that
Had
directly to the SecDef.
had the authorities and access to the authorities to execute, access to the decision maker, and resources. And
Okay.
that's kind of a common theme that you'll hear. Really focused on the U.S.
And what did you produce with
Uh,
those authorities?
So those are all foundational to the GBI we have on the ground today. You can go back to the root of that engineering was under the SDIO days.
Okay.
The root of our ground sensing applications. It's back there. The root of the tree is solid, and it started with SDIO. Fast forward 10 years, we make the change in the pivot to go to the Ballistic Missile Defense Organization.
So, okay,
and so
that. Yeah.
so that really then becomes more of a regional focus. And so the homeland focus is still going on. There's still engineering going on for ground-based interceptors. Command and control is still being matured, but now we're kind of focusing on regional systems.
Like Israel.
Patriot, early Israel, early THAAD, early integration of missile defense capabilities on an Aegis destroyer. And so that went on for about 10 years. During that time frame, no longer reporting to the Secretary of Defense, down to the DefSecDef, which is still an exceptional access to a decision maker, and they had the authorities.
So what was Aegis developed during that? I mean, I know it goes back to 70 with Wayne Meyer, but what were the products that MDA developed?
During that time, they started really looking at maturing the ballistic missile defense capabilities on the Aegis destroyer using the SM-31As. And so it's foundational to where we are today. And then fast forward to when we made the pivot to Missile Defense Agency and given the mandate to deliver the Homeland Defense capability in 2 years, it built on those previous 2 decades of engineering. That engineering expertise, and a lot of those folks actually are still around. And so.
But you got the new authorities or new direct, because you had a president.
We had a presidential directive.
23. Yep. So what was different about this than BIMDO, than SDI?
So I think the big difference on this was, 1, technology was ready. 2, it was a presidential directive that focused the entire government organization on delivering this capability because there was a real threat. Access to the DefSecDef, so you had access to the decision maker. All the authorities were given to the Missile Defense Agency. I can recall
and resources
and resources. I can remember John Hawley sharing a story where there was a flight test challenge, and he was on the phone with General Obering and the Secretary of Defense, and they were working through this. And so that responsiveness to overcome challenges within a program is critical to going fast. Yeah. If you don't have that, and you have to take it back through committees, you're just going to slow programs down. You're going to slow capability for the nation down. And it's really going to be hard to go fast. It's going to be more expensive when you do that because you're not solving the problem. You're waiting on a coalition of personnel to get to a decision. And so that just burns resources. Yeah. And so that was really how MDA got after the homeland capability and delivered it within 2 years.
Let's just go back in time, because North Korea had created an ICBM and was threatened. So this was a real threat and an area defense. It wasn't a terminal defense. It was an area for the entire U.S. continent. I mean, in Canada, everybody, that you were able in 2 years to create. What did you it's impressive. What did you create to defend the entire? I mean, that's the first dome of domes. I mean, that's right there. So what did you create architecture-wise 20 years ago to do this mission?
Okay. So first, I think it's important to note the foundational work had been going on for well over a decade. Years, yeah. That's right. And so in that time frame, with the 3 conditions we talked about, resources, authorities, and access, we constructed the missile defense field at Fort Greely, constructed all of the facilities to support that missile defense field, which is fairly significant. constructed systems to communicate to interceptors in flight, developed and designed and deployed a fire control system that allows the Northcom operators at Fort Greely and in Colorado Springs to operate in unison, in parallel, executing that fight, tied to sensors owned by the Air Force, upgraded by the Missile Defense Agency. Now they're owned by Space Force. Across all these terrestrial sensors, we were integrating satellites all the way back in 2002, integrating satellite sensing capability to feed into the command and control system, into the fire control system, to launch interceptors, to communicate to set interceptors in flight, and have a hard kinetic kill in mid-course.
What other joint thing we've done in the history of this country has done this? Joint wise, like you just explained.
I'd be challenged to come up with one that did it on such a scale, under such a I don't want to say constraint, but it was focused just on that threat set, and so that constrained it. If we had been designing for a peer or near peer, we probably would have been designing it a little bit different, taking advantage of some of the capabilities and options.
That's what you're doing now.
That's what we want to do now, right? The executive order says, take off those constraints, focus on the near peer and peer threats, and deliver a weapon system that defends the United States. And then we've done it, and so all these new capabilities and technologies should tie into that system.
So let's just keep going down this path a little bit, because again, this is the mid or the early 2000s, very politically charged issue here because of arms control and technologies that they doubted on top of that. So unlike Corona, unlike Schriever, we had, they had a lot more failures than you ever had, but you had some missions that didn't go all the way right. So you struggled with that. Can you just talk through that time frame? Because I think that's starting to where people driving to take those authorities away from you. Maybe I don't know what the answer to that is, but I do want to ask you, how were those authorities taken from MDAA, since you delivered it? And I think it was through some of the test failures. So go ahead.
So in the run up to the limited defensive capability in 2004, the agency had to execute 3 flight tests, 3 intercept tests of a ground-based interceptor, launching them out of Kodiak, out of Kwajalein, against targets coming out of Kodiak. And we had one that did not go well. And within, I'd say 3 weeks, they knew exactly what the cause of the failure was. And the authorities, in the trust of the DepSecDef at that time, allowed the program to continue. Now, they went back to test within 5 months, and then had 2 successes and deployed the capability. Let's compare that to the mid 2016s, 2015 timeframe. We have a target failure of a target coming out of a C-17. Within 5 minutes, we know what the problem is. We spent 18 months going back through all the analysis to get back to a flight test.
Because you didn't have authorities, what slowed you down?
I think the risk posture, when you're already at, you believe you already have a capability to address the threat in what you've already deployed up to that 2015, 2016 timeframe, the risk posture shifts, and you don't want to take risks. And when you don't do that, programs start to slow down. And when programs start to slow down, people start asking questions, as they should. Things start costing more. And so I think that risk posture contributed to some of the authorities being pulled back. So,
and that's also affecting your culture as well, right?
It certainly
everybody's going to be risking
because they begin to not step out. So, if that engineer on that aircraft didn't do that analysis and knew what the failure mode was right away, that would have been bad. But he did, and we could have gone right back into test. But now that environment starts to say, well, let me study this a little bit more. Then maybe I don't know all the problems that I had with that. And that starts to stretch out the development cycle. And when you stretch that out, people lose confidence in your ability to deliver on pace.
So what happened in 2019 when they took authorities from you? Just explain, because they actually took.
They did. It was a continuation of, I'll say, going back to what we had in 2002. Over time, it just started to get eroded. In 2019 really was the point where most of the authorities that allowed MDA to go fast were taken and were brought up to a higher level within the Pentagon.
And so now from 2019, you don't have the authorities, but you're expected to do what you did in 2020. Yeah. And that's why you may have a reputation that's out there. Just address the reality of what this is.
I kind of live in a glass house, so I don't like to throw stones. MDA has made some mistakes, but we've learned from the mistakes. And so whether it's a technology issue that we kept the program going longer than we should have, like RKV, we took those lessons, and those lessons are not just learned, they're applied. And so we have changed our approach to how we manage programs. We have changed the organization that manages those programs. And so now what we have in MDA are program executives leading major pieces of the integrated architecture, homeland, theater-based, age-based, decision dominance. They have the authorities now. We're not organized for process, we're organized for execution. And so I think that has set a condition for us to go fast. We've set up a transformation task force. So how do we transform how we do business? So not only from a technology, a model-based system engineering approach, how do we change our acquisition approach? How do we go faster and get leverage from these non-traditionals to increase the cadence of change and capability? And so, we have made a pretty deliberate effort at this. Within 4 days of the executive order, we had an RFI out in the street. The RFI was a request for information was constructed to draw in those non-traditionals and not exclude them. We've just released a multiple acquisition authority instrument, which allows us to have a contract vehicle that gets right to those non-traditionals. Doesn't mean the traditionals are out. There's a role for traditionals, but there's absolutely a role for the non-traditionals. As we start talking about layers of integration, I think at the gaps between systems that still might remain, they've got a huge capability. They've got more capability in the artificial intelligence, machine learning, how to improve the speed of decisions. That's an area where I think non-traditionals really excel.
But to be clear, to do the best of your whole workforce, your 10,000, your 40 years of culture, you have to have the authorities back to get to where you need to go. Correct. So resources are coming. I'm pretty sure the resources are coming, but the authorities is a question that needs to be broken or approached. But that seems to be restricting your ability to go forward.
It does. I think the agency is now postured the way we have changed for the MDA we need to get after this threat and get after the pace we need to do it. I think we've got the right workforce, but you're right. To run this, you got to have access to the decision maker.
Yeah.
You have to have the authorities, not only at the architectural level. You have to have the authorities to execute trades against those architectures. It's not just MDA doing the building; it's the services and other agencies. You got to be able to do trades against there. So you got to have those authorities to do that, and then you got to have the resources to execute it. I think with those three things in the foundation that MDA has from a workforce and what we've already done, frankly, we're seeing it, over in Israel, integrated missile defense systems work. We talked about, I don't know the reason the president chose Iron Dome for his executive order, but I know what Iron Dome does, and it's just the Iron Dome system, but it's two other systems executing layered missile defense that we are part of the cooperative development of. But it wasn't just the Israeli three systems. It was the Aegis system, the THAAD weapon system, forward-based TPY-2s, command and control, overhead sensing, all the way through that integrated architecture is why Israel in April and October was able to successfully defend their country. And that's what we got to have here.
Yeah. Let's just go back to that, because that Israeli Iron Dome quote, everybody thinks it's the shooter, which is the mortar shooter and the rocket shooter. It wasn't. It was the complete layered approach, the integration of their C2 with our C2, the Navy. I mean, you couldn't have done it better with Army Army, Navy, and MDA there, but you have invested in Israel back in the 90s, and you have spent billions. And all of us, I'm sorry, the American tax dollar.
That's right.
We have for the right reasons, and have developed a unbelievable layered defense system that can defend, a small country, right? And that's something I think that MDA should take credit for. I think there was no one else. I mean, you were the ones that funded that with the Israeli organization.
Yeah, I agree, Ricky. It is a layered system approach, system of systems, and they got after it really fast. They started that.
They had authorities, didn't they? They had resources.
So I was going to go. They had the Israeli Missile Defense Organization has the authorities to work with whoever the contractor is that's going to deliver a capability and to make decisions. They had access to the decision maker, IMDO, to the leader who's making decisions, and they had resources both internal to Israel and that the U.S. offered. So again, good recipe for success, and they demonstrated it. And then we integrated that into the integrated missile defense system that MDA is responsible for, and it's saving lives.
Yes.
And it's working.
Yeah,
that's what we need in the United States.
So, can you just talk to us today on what the architecture is for the U.S. homeland, to the general, just the general understanding of the system of systems? Yeah. What does that involve, and what have you done to protect today on that? And I want you to, let's just go with that, because I want you to go to terminal and mid-course, but wait.
Okay. How about I start at the very top?
Okay. Come down.
So space sensing. So we have space sensors out there today.
But like Mike, so that you're not DSP. That's the Space Forces, right?
Yeah. When I say we, I say about the coalition of missile defense. Okay. And so it is Space Force, Air Force, Army, Navy, MDA. None of us are doing it alone. None of us can do it without each other. So yes, Space Force now, they have a sensing capability already up there. It's not everything we need. And I think the executive order really calls out for additional investments so that we can track a threat object from when it launches all the way to where it's going. We want to have track custody. So we have the space sensing layer. Okay, that layer is tied into terrestrial and space communications, and we get that information into our command and control battle management system. So that is I'll say the crown jewel. That is the hub of information coming into no matter what the threat is and where it's going. And so from there, it distributes the information to the fire control systems. And so we really have 3 fire control systems today, 2 when you bring in the IBCS system from the Army, which is going to be a great capability contribution. It goes into the GMD fire control system first, which is having the ability to affect it at the mid-course level, so up in the exoatmosphere. If it's a size of a threat, I'll say in quantity that might allow something to come through, that's when the terminal pieces come in. And so it just doesn't go from mid-course to terminal. You affect it throughout its flight. And so you look at what an Aegis weapon system can do. We could put an Aegis system off of the east and west coast. It's tied into that same architecture. So it's not just GMD, it's an integrated architecture. And so you can start using standard missiles to start trying to negating those enemy objects coming in. And then you have the THAAD weapon system, which again is tied into C2BMC and tied into IBCS. And so it's starting to have an effect, again, still not in terminal yet, still in the upper atmosphere, all the way down to the terminal aspect. And so from a ballistic missile, you're attacking it all the way pretty much through its entire phase of flight. If you add in a space-based interceptor, now you're attacking it even earlier. Yeah. When you start bringing in all these disruptive technologies, you're starting to attack it sometimes even before launch. And so I think that's the key to this executive order is you're tying all these effectors in, so you are not allowing the enemy to have any free space in how he operates. That's the key. You attack it in depth.
And I want to just, because you hit that point, the population doesn't want debris falling off.
Nope.
You want to hit this as far as possible. And that space or pre-boost or
that's right.
Pre-trike. But there's nobody else that's been out there that's worked in space intercepting. I mean, your EKVs, your GMDs, your THAAD, your SM3 Block 2As, you're the only one that's doing this, that's actually got experience in discrimination of all the decoys and stuff. And I think you're developing another sensor to be able to see that better, to be able to play in that space. And I think the executive order is more about space than it is about terminal. We're going to have some terminal, but it's going to be a space problem. And going back to you, just in the past, we've had one guy run, one guy or one woman, Schriever, Meyer, Rickover. What do you think on that way of solving this big problem? Or do you think MDAA has already solved a lot of it? Do you need someone like that to come in at a 4 or 3-star level and say, let's go?
Well, that's a challenging question, Riki. Yeah. So first, I believe, I work for the Missile Defense Agency. I've spent 20 years with them after retiring from the Army. There's not another talented workforce out there that can tackle this problem. They've got the expertise, and they have the motivation to do it. If you look at what we do, we protect our families. It's different than an offensive system. When you leave home, the reason you can take your daughter to ballet is because we've got an effective Homeland Defense shield. It needs to be more effective against a new threat, the peer or near peer. So I think MDA is the right place for this activity to be integrated, to be architected, and to be delivered. Again, with our coalition partners, the services, and the other agencies. I think with the right access to decision makers, I think MDA has leadership that can execute this. We're structured for this mission. I think those are all great leaders in history.
Yeah.
But I'll say MDA has had some great leaders as well. If you look at back when we did LDO, you had General Case, then you had General Obering, you had General Hawley, mission focused. And so I don't know that it's a challenge. Like I think it was Dr. Rifford said, you got to go find that right leader. I think our services are filled with those leaders. Okay. They got to be given the opportunity to lead effectively, authority, access, and resources. And I think with that, MDA can execute phenomenal work and deliver this shield for the homeland.
And we're close. It's that authority piece that is the key here, right? And access. I mean, those two are the key things right here. Good. Well, I'm going to bring out some questions. You good? Anything else you'd like to talk about? We covered a lot here, but we can go back over. Hey, Mark's here, Mark Montgomery, who's on our board. Mark, are you available to ask a couple questions from the public?
Yeah, I've got two. Before I do it, I just want to say a couple things. First, I really appreciate that was a great discussion, Tim, and I agree completely that MDA is the right architect for this. How the Secretary of Defense organizes his final leader is something that's inherently up to him. What rank he wants in that first everything. But if MDA isn't the lead service at the AutoCAD or whatever engineering program you're using to make this, then we've made a real mistake. And I love that you called yourself the Center of Excellence for the Department on the integration of space and terrestrial missile defense. That's exactly what you are. It would be good to know the exact number of engineers at MDA, because I think every once in a while we need to wield that talking point, because I think there's a gross misunderstanding of the relative delta between MDA and everybody else in doing this. And by MDA, I do mean, you're right, the extensions into some of the services where they specifically service you. And I also want to double down on your thoughts that the Navy did it. Wayne Meyer and Aegis are fantastic. Obviously, we have to acknowledge his brilliance in setting that up. But if MDA had not rolled in with the money, the ballistic missile defense aspects of Aegis would not have developed at anywhere near the pace and success that they achieved. And that was, to me, that's one of the great examples of a service cooperating with a civilian defense, with a departmental defense agency in executing a mission. And you'll find very few of that high a quality as the development of maritime-based ballistic missile defense by MDA and the Navy. And so big hat tip. One thing I do want to point out, just because you guys had a great discussion of hypersonic defense, I will say in the glide phase, in fairness to Riki's question, Tim, I think it's fair to say that with the current decision making on down select, MDA will not make the timelines you're discussing. However, should they get more money to go back in time 7 months and reverse what many of us called a bad decision, but you might call a cost-informed decision, we could have hypersonic defense in the mid, glide phase intercept of hypersonic weapons, and that's going to be critical to this success story. So I don't want people to think that on the current, that MDA is going to need to take some action, I think, to get us there. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, that's a good correction. Yeah, today's program as it's set up won't deliver until the mid 2030s. With changes, resources, and a change in decisions, that capability can come back into earlier than 2030.
And you also did a great job talking about, Riki, you and I started to get confused about boost phase when we were talking with Dr. Griffin, because some outsiders have called us to complain that we weren't getting it right. And I think what's happened is I now understand. I'm gonna write this out. And Tom Drugan helped me get smart. Admiral, retired Tom Drugan, a smart missile defense and Navy veteran. I think when Dr. Griffin's talking about the boost phase, he says he's really talking about the first stage booster going to end, which is about 30 seconds. And he's not talking about the ascent phase. And then I think when other people who talk to us, some former MDA officials have said, they're really talking about the second and third final rocket stopping, which might be considered the boost and ascent phase. And that when Dr. Griffin says there's no opportunity in the boost phase, he means that 20 to 30 seconds is the boost rocket. When other people are saying, no, there's a chance in the boost phase, they're probably talking about that extension that gets you to the ascent phase. Tim, is that how you guys kind of think about it, that there's an opportunity in that ascent phase?
Yeah, we view the boosting phase as when it is under propulsion. And so agnostic to first, second, or however many stages, 2 stages, that to us, that's the boost phase. And after it's done boosting, then it's still continuing in its ascent phase until it hits its apogee. And so that's where we think the opportunity is. Upper boost into that ascent. When it's a hypersonic, that ascent is going to be curtailed so they can save that energy and tip over and then come into the hypersonic threat regime, which brings it back down into the atmosphere. And if it's a ballistic, there is a period of time in that ascent phase before the payloads start before they start making it more complex. How about that?
No, I like that.
Mark,
yeah, go ahead.
I just want to before we get off this conversation, I do want to have you address cruise missile defense, because we didn't talk about it. It's not, is that you passed on it when a couple of years ago when you were asked to do it, or Air Force came in and did it? I don't know how that happened, but is that part of your portfolio or is that not?
So cruise missile defense is critical. The Northcom commander, all the way back to General Shaughnessy, they asked the department to solve the Homeland Cruise Missile Defense problem. And so the Missile Defense Agency, we did analysis of alternatives, concept development. There was a decision made in the department that the executive agent for Homeland Cruise Missile Defense would be the U.S. Air Force. And so as part of this executive order, that's another piece of the layer now that has to be integrated, is the Army's aspects of cruise missile defense, the Air Force's cruise missile defense authorities, their architectural plans, and bringing that into a singular integrated air missile defense architecture.
But you're not going to actually create.
We won't be creating, we will be integrating.
Okay, I just want to be like that.
Yep.
So back to Mark. Sorry about that.
I think that's important because, look, giving it to the Air Force was a real, and I think the Air Force is very good at command and control of the airspace, but they're a command and control organization in missile defense. To be brutal, they have no weapons. I mean, that's not fair. They have weapons that they have the plays of this, but that works in the defense of Israel, which is a point source versus, which is smaller than the state of New Jersey, right? When you're trying to defend the whole United States, I don't think anyone's going to argue for F-35s on combat patrol defending the whole area, right? There's not enough F-35s built worldwide for that. So The Army is going to have a really big role in this. The Navy, against all their wishes, is going to have a role in this. And the Air Force will have a big role as the command and control integrator, and then MDA as the systems integrator. I do think I'd like to get Tim's opinion on Tim's opinion on the value in kind of near space or dirigibles or aerostats, and kind of getting the picture right for cruise missile defense and potentially hypersonic missile defense.
Yeah, agree fully. The architecture needs that sensing capability. These are going to be really challenging from space. So you're going to have alternative means. Terrestrial, like you said, the dirigibles, towers. There are a lot of thoughts out there. I think this is an area where some of those non-traditional companies probably have a leg up because they think differently than we have in the past. And so they're seeing what's happening over in Israel, over in the Ukraine, and they're looking at those applications. They're looking at what they've done for border security. All those capabilities and technologies are transferable, and they're low cost. And so I think you're right. Getting that sensing capability for cruise missile and hypersonics far enough where we can have an effect on them is critical.
Hey, Mark, just
go ahead.
Mark, just to have fun with you. I just came from Seymour Air Force Base, where they got the Distinguished Flying Cross for shooting down all those drones. So the Air Force and the F-15E has a hell of a role in doing some of this stuff that's there, right?
But
I know it doesn't have the quantity. I just got to give a little love to them.
Again, if you're telling me you're defending Guam, I'd be thrilled. If you're telling me you're trying to defend the counter value, counter targeting target set, the defended asset list of the United States, I'd say all the air forces in the world couldn't do that. I mean, that there is a delta here. Look, they're going to be a part of it, though, especially early on when you're looking to defend a smaller defended asset list. I think they can be part of it. I think they'll regret getting assigned that mission, much like the Navy would regret being assigned an Aegis patrol somewhere off the West Coast and East Coast of the United States. There'll be a lot of regrets early on, but hopefully over time, technology will subsume that, and you'll get systems like a dirigible. And I got to give MDA a shout out. That Israeli dirigible is not, I mean, that has a lot of MDA, as I recall, a lot of MDA fingerprints on it. Isn't that correct, Tim?
It was co-developed. You're right.
Yeah, so I mean, we already know how to do it, not just J-Lens, which also worked perfectly fine over the United States, I mean, over the National Capital Region, but there, and I believe Poland is now looking at a dirigible system as part of their integrated defense. So hopefully we'll get to that. And the beauty with us is the Army has great firing quality track radars that they can put up in these and really make cruise missile defense gets a lot easier, whether you're in an F-35, an Aegis, or a Patriot. It gets a lot easier if someone's at 25 or 30,000 feet calling balls and strikes for you.
Right.
Yep. I did get a good question. This is a tough one, Tim, but I think you've answered it. I got it from Jason Sherman. Can you comment? I think Dr. Griffin and Ms. Porter were a little bit critical of MDA and said that we're not sure MDA is ready for this new and more comprehensive enterprise, and that saying a legacy enterprise like MDA can up its game to be in charge of the architecture and acquisition and technical thinking that's required, I think is probably wrong. What do you think about that?
Well, first, I disagree with it. Being part of the MDA organization, we talked about some of the things that we have been challenged with that have contributed, I think, to a perspective that MDA is slow. MDA doesn't have the agility. MDA is tied to the traditional big defense primes. Going back mid 2016, 2020, that was true. But since 2020, 2021, it's been a systematic change in the organization on how we operate. We are now doing model-based engineering. We now have an agile DevSecOps environment. So we have embraced the tools of technology to go fast. And so we've made those investments, not only in the equipment, we've made the investments in workforce training to pivot them into these new technologies and how to use them and leverage them to develop at pace. And so I think that's critical on what we've been doing for the past 4.5 years to get ready for this mission. If this mission didn't come, we were still going to make these changes. because we think the nation needs it. They don't need an agency that is slow and takes decades. They need an agency that's delivering capability at the speed of relevance for NORTHCOM and for the commanders in the geographic regions. And so that's what we have been doing, changing our structure, changing our tools, changing our people now to get after this mission set. So Dr. Griffin, when he was there as R&E, he probably saw the historical side of MDA. He had been on our red team for a couple of years, but I think he'd appreciate the changes we've made to get after this mission set.
Well, I agree with your answer, and I agree that MDA really has evolved. I'd say, in fairness to Dr. Griffin, I think some of the press kind of cribbed what he said about there's a difference between developing the architecture, where I think you've shown the agility is developing, and forcing services to do your bidding, which I think even today MDA would say, it's hard. Services are, next to congressmen, the hardest people in the world to whip into shape and do the right thing. And so I think really what he might be talking about more is how do we organizationally take your architecture and force services to alter programs of record, to change their prioritization to match the president and secretary of defense's. They don't often do it when being directed by the secretary of defense. So being directed by MDA will be even harder. So having that kind of leader, what he might mean is MDA has to have either an elevated leadership, a 4-star as a leader, or be aligned with someone who executes for them. Maybe it's the deputy secretary, something like that.
Yeah, I agree, Mark, to both of your comments. I think there's another knob on this, and is control of the resources. When you control the resources, your ability to apply leverage to ensure the capabilities are developed at pace and are integratable is another lever of successful leadership to make this executive order a reality.
That's great. Here's the final question we got. Rick, I think we got enough time. We got 3 minutes. So just a quick answer, because this might be an easy one, complex but easy. Should we assume the executive order is not talking about establishing the ability to shoot down a inbound nuclear, comprehensive nuclear strike from a peer adversary like Russia or China?
Yeah, the scenarios that the Department has under consideration, I don't know that I'm not sure I could answer that 100%. But certainly when we look at architectures that we have considered, taking on a mass raid from a peer, numerically that is extremely challenging and might even be cost prohibitive.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and I don't think we say it out loud enough. I mean, that nuclear strike, a first strike from Russia or China, our defense from that is mutual assured destruction, and that still remains a relevant effort. And by the way, I think we're spending somewhere north of $350 billion to modernize 3 different legs of the triad to do that. So I mean, the trough is full there already, and I think that it might be a fair statement to say that's handled by this, because otherwise, I think the cost of a Golden Dome, Iron Dome, any kind of dome for a comprehensive missile defense against an inbound ICBM strike might be fairly high for the foreseeable future.
Right, but and being able to effectively negate, I'll say, coercive type launches, I think that's critical. And it's not going to be free. It buys decision time for the National Command Authority. But when you look at what we protect from a population center perspective, Hurricane Katrina cost the nation somewhere around $32 billion to recover from. And so when I start adding up all the cities, big population centers from a nuclear type strike, GMD, the Missile Defense Agency, the underlayer capabilities, the space sensing capabilities, I think that's an insurance policy that is well warranted and certainly not going to come at a price like the offensive side of the equation.
Thanks, Mark. Let's just wrap up. Tim, thank you for being here. But any final comments on this discussion?
I appreciate the time to come and talk, Riki. And my hope out of this whole discussion is I I represented the Missile Defense Agency professional workforce well. They are a national treasure, and I'm kind of blessed to work with them every day. So thank you.
Thank you. People matter.
They do.
And winners associate with winners to win, and you have a bulk of winners there. I just, from this discussion, getting your authorities back to what you have, that is absolutely critical. For you not having those authorities is ridiculous. You did this. You did this in a presidential directive 20 years ago in under 2 years.
Right.
So that's got to be put out there and addressed on that. So thank you for enlightening everybody and just history. It's fact. This is what happened.
Right.
It's not, it's 40 years of depth. There's nobody out there that can match. There's nobody.
I agree.
And that's the fact. So you have to be our prime player. You have to be the MVP. You have to be the GOAT. And that's where, this is right now. People questioning that. It's you got to do it. So thank you. I appreciate the time. Great discussion. Thank you.